Okay, when I microphone a drum kit, I'm going to start out with the overhead microphones. Now, I like to use good condenser microphones to get a nice, good sound of the cymbals. These are Shure SM81s. Now, depending on where I place these microphones, I could either get just the sound of the tops of the cymbals by placing the microphone out over the top, or I can also pick up the drums, the snares, the toms, and get a nice whole drum kit image if I place the microphones further out over the drums. Now, I like to place them over these cymbals, okay, and I like to keep them wide apart to get a nice stereo separation. And again, I'm only using the overhead mics just to get the tops of the cymbals. These microphones have a built-in low cut or a high pass filter. So I go ahead and engage that on the microphone itself, which keeps the low end rumble out of the microphones. And again, just gives me the nice top shimmery end of these overheads of these cymbals. Now I'm going to move on down to the kick drum. Now when I mic the kick drum, I start off with a good dynamic microphone. This is an AKG D112. Now there's a couple of things that I look for when I mic the kick drum. One is most kick drums have a hole in the outer head of the kick drum. Now, depending on the type of sound that you want to get, you can place the microphone inside of that hole just barely to get a nice bodied sound of the kick drum, or you can really shove it in there to get the sound of the beater head. It depends on the type of sound that you're going for. Generally, I keep it on the outside of the hole. Now, this drum, kick drum, does not have a hole, which is an interesting thing, and sometimes you'll come across this with bands, and that's okay. It still sounds excellent, and what you do is just place the dynamic microphone as close to the outside of the drum head as possible without it touching. Now with the dynamic microphone, I'm also going to add a sub-kick microphone. This is an inverted speaker turned into a microphone, and what this does is it picks up all the frequencies below 100 hertz really, really good. So it's going to give me that bottom end. Now it's only efficient if you have great subwoofers. If you don't have excellent subwoofers that can reproduce those frequencies, then don't worry about it. It's not necessary. But if you do, I like to blend these two microphones together to get a really big kick drum sound. Now I'm going to move over here to the snare. Now with the snare drum, I'm going to use a dynamic microphone. This is an Shure SM57. And again, it takes really good high pressure sound level. Now what I'm going to do when I look at the snare, depending on the type of music, is determine what kind of sound I want to get out of the snare drum. If I leave the microphone pointed towards the middle of the snare, it's going to give me a nice attack sound of the stick hitting the center of the head. Now, by pulling the microphone back a little, so it's sitting over the rim of the snare, I'm going to get more of a resonant sound. The resonance that kind of travels along the body of the snare, okay? It just depends on the type of music that you are mixing. For my purposes, I like to have the microphone centered at the position, in the center position. I like to get the sound of that drum stick really attacking that head. So I'm going to leave it right there. Now with the snare, I'm also going to add in a bottom microphone. Again, it's another Shure SM57, a dynamic microphone. This microphone is going to be pointed up at the bottom snares themselves. Now that's going to give a nice rattle to it. Now these two microphones I'll blend together to get a really good snare sound. It's important to remember that when you use this technique, two microphones on the snare, one on top, one on bottom, that there could possibly be a phase cancellation effect due to the positioning of these microphones. The way to find out is when you put these two microphones together when you're mixing, if the bottom end seems to be missing, then there's probably phase cancellation going on. So what you want to do is just reverse the polarity of one of these microphones, and that should take care of the problem. So let's move up over here to the toms. Now for my toms, again, I'm using dynamic microphones. And you can use any dynamic microphones. There's plenty of them out there. I like to use the Shure SM57s, again, for the toms. Now, I'm going to follow the same principle that I use with the snare. On the toms, the further towards the center of the tom, the more attack of the stick I'm going to get. The further out towards the rim of the tom, the more resonance I'm going to pick up from the outer shell of the tom. Now, I want to keep my drum sounds together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the microphone for the tom also towards the center so I get that attack. I'm going to move over to the floor tom. Same thing with the floor tom. Now, again, I'm using a Shure SM57, a dynamic microphone. Now, because of the way I'm micing the snare and the other tom, I want to keep them uniform, so I'm going to keep this microphone aimed towards the center. I want to get the attack of the drumstick hitting the tom. If I have it out here, again, I'm going to pick up more resonance. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, except if I have my snare picking up attack, that tom picking up attack, this tom picking up resonance, they're not going to be really balanced. So I want them to be balanced. I want them to sound almost identical. I just want them to have their own different tone. So I'm going to keep the mic position similar.